Okay, well, guys, welcome to our panel on, it's called Let's Talk About Software Consulting as a Business. And I'll let each of us introduce ourselves. My name's Armen Stein. I'm the president of a company called J Street Technology. We're near Seattle. And we've been in business for about 15 years now. We have about a dozen or so development employees in our company. And we basically work in SQL Server database applications, mostly for small, medium, large business. It's kind of a range, nothing very industry specific. And we also do, the front ends are mostly in ASP.NET and Ajax, and also we do a bunch of Access front ends for inside corporate use, which is kind of a niche that we have. And I'll let these guys introduce themselves as well.
Hi, thank you for having me. My name is Luke Chung. I'm the president and founder of FMS. We're located in Vienna, Virginia, just outside Washington, D.C. We're in our 23rd year of business. And we have a group about the same size as yours. And we create a variety of commercial off-the-shelf products plus consulting services in a variety of industries, both private and public. Being just outside Washington, D.C., we have a government component as well. And we try to balance both commercial and government work.
Great. My name is Paul Sheriff, president of PDSA Incorporated. We're a software house just down here in Southern California, in Orange County. And let's see, we've got about 16 people, developers. And I've been around for a little over 18 years now. I've been doing this for a long time, like Luke and these guys too. Seems like a long time, but a lot of ASP.NET, recently WPF, Silverlight, things like that that we're doing as well. Just all custom development. We have a few development products that we sell as well.
Great. So I see a theme going here. We've all been in business between 10 and 20 years or so, and we all have between 10 and 20 developers on staff. And I think we all started with very small staffs, probably one person. I know I did, a company of one. And so what we want to talk about today is, what do we face as software consultancies, and what are the challenges we face, and then what have we done to try to meet those challenges? And I guess I'll kick it off with a topic that's on a lot of people's minds right now, and that is the current economy. What have you guys seen with the current economy, with the downturn, and are things changing with the way you do business or the way customers are making decisions?
Okay. Oh, I'll go first? Okay. We're seeing definitely a downturn as far as new business coming in. Existing customers are taking a little bit longer to commit to projects is what we're seeing. We've had a lot of prospective clients that we've been dealing with for like a year, and they still haven't pulled the trigger. So those things are definitely affecting us. So, what we've always done is we do run a very tight ship. We do keep a lot of cash reserves so we can, muddle through these hard times. And I think that's probably one of the key factors that's really kept us in business all these years. Because, after 18 years, I've been through a couple of these cycles. I think this one is probably the worst we've seen. But, we're still making it. The people are still doing projects. They're just taking a little bit longer, I think, to commit to them.
Yeah, it's riding the ups and downs is really key. We do tend to hold on to every dollar worth of cash that we have, just because I never know when I'm going to need it. Mm-hmm. Line of credit is really good to have as well. In fact, the best time to get a line of credit is exactly when you don't need it, yep. And then have it available. So that's key for us to have it in our hip pocket to make sure that it's available when we need it.
Right.
So yeah, what do you?
Well, we've been monitoring our clients over the past year or two, and we see some of them losing business, and that will trickle up to us. So there's no doubt about that this economy impacts that. On the product side of the business, that helps offset some of our revenues because we have some commercial off-the-shelf products, and that is part of the challenge, I think, in running a consulting business, because it is a feast or famine type of operation. It's very difficult to balance exactly the human capital and resources exactly with the schedule that clients have or don't have. Sometimes they want it and they want it right away, and other times, a delay of a month or 3 months could just devastate utilization rates. So that's one of the challenges that every consulting firm has.
Do you guys hire, contractors to come in in times of this busy?
We have contractors. I would say about half of our staff are salaried full-time staff, and that's what we call the core team. And the core team is able to code, but they're also able to manage projects, manage other people, write specifications, help with architecture, whatever. And then probably the other half of the team is what we call our extended team, or our variable resources. And those could be contractors that are actually other incorporated companies, and we just pay them as 1099s.
Right.
Or they could be part-time hourly employees, and they're quite variable. A lot of times they either have other jobs, or they have a spouse that also works, or something like that. So they can ride the flow, the ebbs and flows with us.
Yeah.
Because you mentioned feast or famine. That's on my notes. In fact, feast or famine. I mean, we bounce from it seems like every consultancy does. We bounce from where are we going to get our next job to how are we going to get it all done, right? It's constantly back and forth, and I would rather be in how are we going to get it all done mode, but
Right.
that's very stressful too, because if a customer has something they need done by a certain date, it can just be brutal trying to get it all finished and have the quality that you want to deliver, but have it on time and constantly be managing those internal resources, right?
Yep.
Because you want to put the best people on each job, but sometimes they're not available. So how do you guys manage that?
We're about 90% full-time salaried core team, and then about 10% where we have, they're not contractors. They are, but like you, we hire well-established companies,
Yep.
people that we know can get the job done. I'm not going to try any unproven person.
Or train 'em.
Or train them,
Right.
because they got to know our way of doing things, our process and procedures. So.
Right.
I mean, we've used contractors in situations where they bring in knowledge and expertise that we don't have internally.
Right.
But in general, all our people are internal people, full-time employees that do the services. When we expand and go after larger opportunities, that's where we are involved in teaming arrangements, especially when we're going after projects, say, with the federal government. We offer a teeny tiny piece of the overall solution. So in those situations, the name of the game is to be a subcontractor to a bigger systems integrator, or be the prime and bring in other players to create a competitive team that can win the contract.
Right. If there's any questions at any point, guys, just let us know, and we'll respond to those. So I am pretty passionate about the style of consulting, which is fixed bid versus time and materials. I'm passionate on time and materials. I think that there's a lot of reasons why hourly estimates and managing those estimates as part of the project makes for a better software development experience for both sides, for us as the consultant and for the customers in the long run, actually. So, because we've seen a lot of cases where people call us and they say, we've lost our developer. We call it developer flight. Somehow something's happened to our developer, and usually when we ask a few questions, it turns out a lot of times is that either they were in over their head, and we get this a lot, and they went and got a real job. The other thing we hear a lot, though, is, well, we had a contract, they gave us a fixed bid, but they never got the software done. They never got it completed, right? And so we come in and say, well, we'll complete it, but you know what? We're going to charge you by the hour. We're going to be really reasonable about how that goes. So are you guys as passionate as I am on either side?
Pretty much. We do mostly time and material. We've done a few fixed, but the only way I'll do fixed bid projects, is if I have done the specs and the prototype. I'm not going to come in and somebody else says, oh, we got some great specs here, because usually they're crap, right? Technical term, sorry, crap. So we're very much on that side of the time and material, but managing the customer expectations all the way around.
Right.
We start out with a mini discovery phase where we go in for maybe 24 or 40 hours max and say, just pay us for that time. Let's make sure we can work together. Let's make sure that you're comfortable with what we're proposing. Then we go on and we do the next phase, which might be a little larger, and then we finally have our specs and our prototype done. At that point, I tell them, look, by that end, you're going to have a deliverable. The deliverable is your spec and your prototype that you can now shop around to anybody else. Well, you know what happens? They end up usually doing the work with us because we've all gotten along so well. They trust us by that point, and they don't mind the time and material.
But they have that safety valve. They know that they have something they can take away. Even that first phase that you were talking about, we call it a phase 0. People call it sometimes requirements analysis or requirements definition. Whatever you call it, it's that initial, let's talk about having a plan, right? Let's talk about what is the system going to do. We say it's the what of the system, and then later it's the how. But during the what part of the system, it's really just a shopping list. In the most simplest case, it's here's what the system's going to do, and if we can check all these off at the end of the project, then we know that we met all the basic requirements of the system. And they can be really quite simple, just bullet lists, really. Some technology architecture and some other decisions of maybe systems it has to connect to and things like that. But at the end of the day, they can walk away with that. And that does give them a really good feeling. Do you guys do that too?
Yes and no. I mean, it depends on the situation. Certain opportunities require a fixed price bid, especially if we're going after some of the government projects. There is no choice. Competitors are going to be providing a fixed price, so that's the name of the game. So either you come up with a price or you don't play. And so in that case, it's not that the government's unreasonable. They have a limited budget. They're allotted a certain amount of money by their state or Congress or whatever, and that's what they've got to work with. But as you mentioned, Paul, it's about establishing trust. It's about getting to a point where both sides are comfortable that it will be fair. Right. And it's not to either party's interest to come up with a solution that there's a loser on one side. So we would evaluate each situation, and based on the opportunity and based on the constraints and parameters around it, come up with something that will work for us. Right. And if we can win it at that price, then that's great. If not, well, maybe it wasn't for us.
And here's the thing, too. I mean, to tell you the truth, never, ever have I seen a fixed bid. I think you guys would agree with that. Because you end up with 30, 40, 50, hundreds of change orders, right, that they pay for in addition to that. So you may come up with, yeah, it's going to be $1 million, but it ends up being $1.5 million. Right? Because there are going to be changes. That's just the nature of the beast.
Right. And that's where the management part is so important, is to understand that when a change occurs, paperwork has to go with it.
Correct.
So that the organization doesn't end up eating that cost.
That's right.
And at the same time, that the client understands that what they're asking for has a fee associated with it. Because as a general practice, if the client asks for something and we say we can do it and don't provide a price, it's presumed it was done for free.
It's included, right?
Yeah, and so it's important to note that.
But that's the management part up front too, that you have to talk with the client up front in that beginning phases and explain to them, okay, this is what fixed price means. This is what defines a change. And I mean, our list that we have that defines what is a change, I mean, it's 4 or 5 pages long. And we go through and say, look, guys, if you do this, this is a change. Because a lot of customers do not understand that. They say, wait a minute, why can't you just add this new field here on this one screen?
Or what we get sometimes is, but we talked about that.
Yeah.
We talked about having this report that would do such and such. And we say, well, talking about it and putting it into the design and constructing it are all different things.
Correct.
So we have to, I think you have to go back to that management where you have to look at, here's the list of things we're going to do. And has to be very well specified. I mean,
written down,
very well documented. I mean, I'm curious of how you manage the expectation of, well, this should have been included. Like, haven't you ever heard that? Well, that's just obvious. It should have been included, and then you're trying to push back and manage that. So how do you handle it?
Right. That happens in a time and material situation as well.
Absolutely.
You do the work and they say, well, it's missing something. Well, I don't want to pay extra for that.
Right.
It should have been included. So that I don't think that's
it's not unique.
That's not a contract issue. It's just an expectation issue. So part of the process that we like to have is a lot of feedback and deliverables, so that we can make sure that if issues appear, they're tackled earlier rather than later, so that they can be handled much cheaper. And if we have to eat it, we have to eat it, but it's not a big deal.
Right.
And we're not going to nickel and dime over small issues. But sometimes their foundation changes.
Frequent deliverables are I think very key on all of that. And the other thing though that to me it's like we don't do a fixed bid. We don't even do time and material until I've done the prototype and the spec. Because if they have a prototype, they have all the screens, all the fields. The user's been able to sit down, click through everything, and then on the spec doc, it describes each screen and what each field does. Now when they come and say, hey, but this one field, why is that a change? Is it on the prototype? Is it in the spec?
Right.
No.
And what kind of prototypes do you use? I'm curious about this because we use Visio and we sort of go with the paper prototyping route, but using Visio.
We do everything in Visual Studio.
So you build it in
We
Visual
actually
Studio?
mock up the screens because then they're the actual screens that the customer's going to get, right? They get to play with it. They can click through. They can see things. I mean, there's no data, no anything else behind
basic nav
it.
is built in.
But the basic nav of how they go from one thing to another. Maybe a little dialogue comes up and says, you just saved your data.
Yeah.
Right? Because if they have that in front of them, how can they argue with that? How can they say, oh, we talked about that? Really? Where's it on the screen? You see what I mean? So without that, I don't know how we could ever do a fixed bid. I don't even know how we could do a project, tell you the truth.
Yep, interesting.
So that's been our approach.
Do you do agile?
I'm sorry?
Do you do agile?
Agile.
Oh, great. So the question is, do we do agile? We do a modified agile, okay? I mean, I've been doing this for over 20 years, and it is somewhat agile, but I'm not a big fan of that because I've got to get, my customer wants a price, right? So it's agile up to the point as I'm going through, working with the clients, developing this prototype, doing the spec at the same time, and that's a very iterative process, right? Okay, when it comes to the development side, we're not that agile. I don't believe in that.
I would say the same thing. I would say with all three of us, I think, do a lot of database applications, and these databases can have 50 tables or they can have 200 tables. And a database application with that much of a foundation, I'm not going to say it's an all or nothing thing where you can't do iterations. I'm not going to say that, but I don't think you can do the kind of agile iterations that I've heard people talk about where, these sprints and these quick 2-week turnarounds. I mean, there are some things that for it to work at all, I mean, in other words, for it to even be usable or have any kind of demonstration at all, it's going to take many weeks or maybe even a few months. Now, that's not to say we do something called a hard hat tour. So we say, we're going to go onto the construction site, right? Put your hard hat on, and we're going to actually walk through the software and realize danger, right? There's going to be things that don't work yet. There's going to be areas that are a little, not quite right. But as long as we call it a hard hat tour and we tell our customer we're going to take a walk through the system, then they get to see it's not a delivered thing because we're not going to deliver the whole thing to their server or let them play with it and turn them loose. But they can try it out and they can see with some guidance, with a tour guide basically, usually the project manager on the project, will take them through and show them how things are going while it's being constructed. So it's a little scary, but we try to tell them what to expect and that you got to realize not everything's going to work. And there's areas that we avoid, right?
I think there are pieces that are agile and some, that fits very well in certain instances and then in others it just doesn't. So I think you have to be adaptable to not just saying we're always going to do one methodology or another.
Right.
I mean, I think part of this also depends on the size of the project and the scale of the project. So for instance, we just did a time and material prototype that took almost a year to do. And it employed agile development efforts through it, just building the prototype, with a basic wireframe and then agile development, very, very fast iterative weekly builds that were done, tested, and given to the client. Feedback came back and immediately cycled through.
So how did you do a weekly build if... did it have a database?
It had a database.
So how much of the weekly build, like in the early stages, when you delivered it, how much was actually usable?
Well, it was a prototype, so it wasn't being used for production.
Right.
It was hosted by us, so it was our SQL Server on top of our .NET, separate from the development platform. So there wasn't a deployment issue. They could just log in and see it and turn it on, and they could provide their feedback right on it.
And they knew that there were areas that just weren't done yet?
Yeah, absolutely. Because, part of the whole process is based on the concept that we don't know what it is that we want. None of the parties do until they see it. And I'm guilty of this all the time. My developers create things. And I look at it and I say, oh, no, we should change this, we should change that. I'm like, why didn't you tell me at the beginning? Well, I didn't see it. I didn't know it. I wanted that until I saw it and used it for the first time.
Right.
So if I'm guilty of that.
Those are very agile type methods.
Right, and so the idea is to
iteration.
Right, constrict that as much as possible to get that through.
It's basically the feedback mechanism.
But you're not happy with that answer.
What's that?
Agile approach to software, to creating project in agile way.
Of consulting companies? Well, one of the gentlemen that was going to be on our the question is, have we heard of software consulting companies that have actually implemented Agile and successfully and developed applications using that?
And the sub-question here is,
Yes?
because I just have no idea how to do that. But somebody will ask me, my boss will ask me, just a simple question, okay, when? You know, when will that be done? And he's asking me now. And Agile actually assumes discovery on the way.
Right.
So the prototype approach I can understand, and I'm actually using it the same with my team. Because I'm signing off after discovery phase happen in most cases, not before. And Agile assumes something else. And
Right.
I just cannot grasp it.
So the follow-up question is basically, if, Agile assumes that you're going to discover as you go, and your boss or your client says, when's the whole thing going to be done, and how are those two reconciled? And I think that's what we were kind of going back to, of having the list of things that have to be done. Right. I think if you talk to Agile proponents, and I'm not for or against Agile, I think I borrow things that work, as I go along. I don't really put a label on it. I just know things that have worked for us, through trial and error in our shop. But I think a lot of people who are Agile proponents would say, well, you're doing these short iterations, but you do have an end goal in mind, and you can have an end budget and an end date, but you're supposed to discover as you go along, right? Right. The contract really locks it in, exactly.
And and that's a great thing. And I mean, I think your original question, have I ever heard of a pure Agile software company that does this? I think most of them probably aren't doing it right, because Agile does not say that you're supposed to discover all the way through. Okay? I think they really still say you still need to have the foundation there. You still have to have the specs, the end goal, like you said, the checklist, right? And then once you have that, now you can apply the Agile software techniques. But there's still no substitute. I don't think the Agile approach really comes in that upfront piece. Okay? So the people that are maybe you're talking to really maybe don't understand the whole Agile approach. In fact, I just read, was it an MSDN magazine or something? I just read this, where one of the guys who originally founded the Agile just said, he said, no, we're not saying you blow past the whole design and spec phase. He's saying once you have finished that now determining the best way of putting that software together to meet those goals, that's where it becomes the Agile approach. So,
I mean, I think there's a philosophical idea behind the Agile movement, which is that applications never die. They never end. I mean, development is continuous. Depends what level you want to do it at, but one never thinks of finishing. So it's a matter of where do you draw the line. As one of my people like to say, shipping is a feature. When do we add that feature into the application? Well, shipping is not the only feature. There may be multiple times that you actually ship and go into production.
We say, do you want it perfect or do you want it delivered? Yeah. So, it's always that thing of how do you get it out the door and get it into the hands of people that are going to use it, right?
Right. And so I think part of the iterative approach, whether you call it agile or prototyping or iterative or getting to production quicker, is to try to deliver the most important pieces first, not waste time working on features that people end up never using anyway. Yeah. Some of these applications get very complex, and we find out years later that some important feature had some huge bug in it. Well, no one ever used it.
Nobody uses
right?
it, right?
But how much was spent trying to create that feature that then was supplanted by some other process change or regulation change or whatever? It may have nothing to do with software.
I think we try to manage this by breaking projects into phases. And we actually try to talk our customers out of things. So a lot of times we'll create a project and we'll break it into the first phase. And the customer will say, well, we need all these things. And we'll say, well, are any of those things, could we wait till phase 2 for any of those? And we charge by the hour, so you would think we would be reducing our revenue. And in a way we are in the short term. But what happens is, as Paul and Luke have said, it's like these systems, you have to get it in people's hands. And then when they start using it, then they realize that the things I thought were important, they're not that important. And things that I didn't even imagine are now the top priority. So the top priority things for phase 2 and for phase 3 cannot be predicted before you put phase 1 into place. So this is why, I mean, maybe that's part of Agile as well. I mean, maybe we're all doing Agile development without realizing it. But by breaking it into phases and by prioritizing each phase, and again, our projects do have to end. Like, they're paying us as a consultancy. So at the end of the day, we have to deliver the product, the project, and the software, and then it has to work. And then they want us to go away for a while because they can't afford us for a while. Yeah. Right? And then that stuff has to work, and then they develop a feature list of what they want in the next phase.
And I think, you have a very valid point. Your customer is asking you when. And the customers will ask you that on day one, won't they?
Yeah.
Right? When is it going to be done, and how much is it going to cost? Well, you just told me to build a house, but let's see, you didn't tell me how many garages you want, how many floors you want, how many windows, doors, basement, everything else, right? So how am I supposed to answer that, okay? Without you first, without all of us collaboratively sitting down and determining our blueprint. And I always go back to that house analogy because it really works with clients. Clients understand that.
We use that a lot too.
They say it's a blueprint.
I don't like that.
You don't like that?
No, you don't like the house analogy? No. What's your analogy?
Well, I think the best relationships we've built with our clients is an ongoing partnership. Mm-hmm. The house is never finished. Okay, it's a matter of.
You haven't visited my house. My house is never finished.
I don't know anybody's house that's really finished.
So it's a matter of establishing that trust, as you mentioned before, making sure that we are delivering value all along the way, that they are getting what they want, and we create an environment where they can ask for things and get those, and then also not ask for things and actually get those in the future. We've had situations where clients demand everything to be in version 1 because the people that are there are afraid they'll never get the budget to get version 2. So they're afraid that if they don't ask for it up front, they'll never get it. And part of the challenge is to get them to understand that we can deliver these things, those things that they want today, they may not want after phase 1, but to establish a way where we can build things quickly and they can see changes and move forward in a partnership where they do get what they want, but they get it in a way that's reasonable.
Yeah, it makes sense. A lot of these projects move from the development phase, which goes pretty fast. We get the project installed, we get the software being used by people, and then there's a support phase. And then maybe that's sort of what we're talking about. It depends on what you call it. But our support phase is basically the customers are using the system, and they're always coming up with new things that they want, and they're adding it to a wish list. And sometimes support can have very small iterative. In other words, we don't have to go with a huge phase 2 and a big effort. Sometimes the customer is willing to have us sort of there available all the time, and a few hours a week, or maybe tens of hours a week, or 100 hours a week, whatever it may be. 100 hours a week would be pretty high for us, but a dozen to 20, 30 hours a week is not uncommon for a large system to have that sort of level of support, and that can go on for months. Yeah. I mean, it just depends on what their list looks like and what they want done in what time frame.
Most of our clients we have on a service level agreement, an annual service level agreement, so that they are purchasing our services on a use it or lose it basis on a monthly term. And we give them a discount for that in order to make that annual commitment. And we have people basically available to answer calls or to go in on an emergency or, to not just to fix things, but all of a sudden they might need something new that had never come up before. At least we have the people already reserved and ready to go for them. That gives them the level of service that they want, and then they also have an infinite list of things that they want done, so that our people can work on those if they don't ask for other things.
We do the same thing.
Do you do the use it or lose it SLAs?
Yep.
See, we haven't done that too much. We've done it in a couple of cases, but not very common. But you guys both do it?
Mm-hmm.
We do it. I mean, the key for us is to offer it at a discounted rate.
Correct. Right.
So that they will purchase a larger amount. Yep. Because if you do it at the same rate, then why bother signing up for a minimum SLA?
Yeah. I understand it's working pretty well for you guys, but what does it do for the other side?
Well,
so the question is, go ahead. So the question, Luke, is, so that's good for you, but what about for the customer? How does it benefit them?
The benefit to the customer is immediate response. So we have people available. We already know we've budgeted people to take care of their projects. It's not like they disappeared for 3 months and nobody knew about. So that's the availability here, and also that they have things that they want. Part of this is also an insurance policy for the client as well. I mean, when you call the fire department and you want a fireman at your house, it's not the time for the fireman to recruit fire, or train their fire people, that people have to be ready to respond.
So is it some kind of premium service?
This is a service. It's not necessarily a premium. We actually charge a lower rate than our standard rate by committing to a year-long level. So they can say, okay, we will have somebody 5 days a month dedicated to our project.
And they're available to you.
And they're available. And it's somebody that's available there.
So what percentage of the time, I'll ask each of you, what percentage of the time that people prepay or commit to, I should say, not necessarily prepay, but
right.
a committed to agreement, how much do they leave on the table, percentage-wise? Do clients leave those hours on the table and not use them?
Typically they use them, but we've had some cases where, and we always try to do the sliding scale, basically, because that's a little bit more benefits the customer, and it also gets them to buy into it. Where we finish a project in January, we're going to say, tell you what, we're going to have somebody available for 10 days a month for February and March and April. Starting in May, it'll go down to maybe 5, and then see a little bit sliding, because we know after we finish a project there's going to be a lot. And see, here's the thing: if I don't have one of my guys billable on their project, I got to move them somewhere else. So what I'm telling the customer is, look, I will guarantee you that they'll be able to jump immediately back on your project, right? And if they don't need it, that's still a great insurance policy, and that's the way they look at it.
Right.
So,
because otherwise it could be months before they get back on the project if
Right.
they haven't queued themselves up.
right.
And you might be at the risk of losing that developer
Right.
or not being able to afford
We might
people.
lose the customer because the customer gets mad because
Right.
we didn't have somebody to jump in immediately on them.
Right.
So it's an insurance policy, but it really benefits both people, I think.
Right.
Our clients have used up their hours. Rarely have they not
rarely do they.
use it, because they actually supplement that with additional projects.
So they'll fill the pipeline somehow,
Right.
right?
Usually.
Yeah.
Do you put limits around it? Like, does it have to be with that particular project, or are they just buying hours in
They're
bulk?
buying the hours. They're buying a certain number of hours. It can be on that project. It could be, janitorial services. Whatever they want our people to
So
do.
you'll pick up a mop and go to work, Luke? Is that what
Yeah,
you're saying?
sure. Anything for a client.
That's right. That's right.
Do you have any other questions around
Did that answer your questions? Good.
Yeah, that's go ahead.
Sort of model like that, especially with the way you were describing how people basically are exactly doing an agile process with you. I wonder if that kind of model isn't the perfect way to actually implement agile as a consultancy firm, because you basically say, okay, commit to this much of using our services for this amount of time, and do whatever you want with it. That seems like the perfect opportunity for them to just do an iterative development cycle.
Yeah. So the question
It
is,
could
I mean, this type of model, this use it or lose it, sort of a agreed upon amount of hours, that works really well for Agile. And I would say that sounds like it would be true, because if you have these hours ready to go,
Right.
and especially if it's in a support mode. Now, this doesn't really work very well for the initial development.
Well,
I
but
don't
for the
think
support
so.
mode, it seems like it would.
See, we use it for support, the existing product. It could be speccing out new work. I mean, whatever they want the hours to be done. It's just a certain level of commitment. And from a budgetary perspective for our clients, not all our clients, but some of our clients, this is just like hiring somebody on their staff anyway, somebody a quarter time or something like that. And it makes it very easy for them to put it in their budgets, because they have an annual budget that their CFO has to approve. So this just fits in with their standard way of budgeting or hiring their resources.
So I won't put you on the spot, Luke, as far as dollar amounts, but what kind of percentage can people save if they do this sort of prepaid agreement?
And we do about 10% off.
10%? Yeah.
We do 10 to 20% depending.
Okay. So yeah,
How
it
many
could be
hours?
significant savings as far as the rate goes if you're prepaying for those hours.
Yeah.
But it's a
Or
lower
pre-agreeing.
cost for us because they have that commitment. We don't worry about the utilization as much.
Yeah, makes sense.
And that's the way we take care of our existing customers.
So that goes back to the feast or famine thing of, because the thing about the consulting business is it's so spiky. I mean, the demand and the hills and the troughs, it can kill you, and that's why we opened up talking about cash, having cash on hand. We opened up having variable resources. We talked we have different percentages. I guess our shop is probably the most variable. I've gone from being almost 100% fixed salaries, which I don't know. I mean, people sometimes ask me how long I've been in business, and one of my answers is about 380 payrolls. Because I mean, making payroll is that as a person, if you have to make payroll, that's really what you're talking about as far as being in business.
Yeah.
And that's what turns the hair white. And when you're cutting checks and you've got to be able to cover them no matter what, and manage that up and down of the demand. I mean, that's a really challenging thing. So,
can we ask a question of the audience about how many of you are in business for yourselves right now?
Okay.
So we got a few.
Halfway.
Okay,
yeah.
we're halfway. That's fine.
If you're half, you tell you what, with consulting, if you're halfway, you're all the way in.
Yeah.
Because that's really where your heart is, and that's what you're working on for your own self.
Okay.
And then a lot of times, I think people, when I talk to people about this kind of thing, it's not necessarily that they're in it right now, but they're curious about maybe getting started with something. And we, all three of us started just solo shops, starting off on our own. And then, I think probably when it moved into having employees, was it the same problem I had, which was I was able to bring in more work than I could do.
Right.
And then it just started going from there.
Sure, pretty much. Yeah, you might start out with a contractor or two, and then you see that they're still there, so then you hire them as employees.
Right.
So a lot of that's the way it starts out.
I mean, I think what usually happens, I think it sounds like it did for the three of us here, is kind of leave a real job and become an independent. So now you're a contractor,
right.
And then at some point that changes from being a contractor to a business owner, right? Where you're creating a business which isn't just about selling your own time.
Right.
It's about selling other people's time.
It's leveraging, yeah.
Right. And that's a whole different ballgame, and not everybody's suited for that. Not everybody's suited to be an employee. I probably can't work for anybody ever again.
I wouldn't hire you.
Yeah, no, very few people would.
Actually, I can tell you're in trouble.
Absolutely. And but not everybody's suited to be an entrepreneur. So being a business owner requires a large set of skills, and if you don't have all of those skills, you either have to find those skills, hire those skills, or get other people to do those. And that could be from sales, marketing, finance, all sorts of other things above and beyond just doing the work.
And that's probably a good point. I mean, those of you that are here that haven't really branched out yet, you may be so great technically. You guys have fantastic technical skills. That's not enough to run your own business. You have to have all that other skills that Luke just mentioned, business, sales, marketing, finance. I mean, you're everything, or you hire that skill that you don't have, okay? And that's one of the things that you need to really do a self-assessment on. Okay? The best time to start a business is prior to having a wife and kids. I'll tell you that right now.
Mortgage.
Okay? Yeah, and a mortgage, anything like that, right? I mean, if you can start it when you're just starting out, you're in the best position, I think. So.
Since you're talking about hiring sales and accounting and human resources, etc., at what phase in your business cycle do you hire sales? Do you hire them up? Prioritize the hiring of accountants, salesmen,
So, yeah, that's a good question.
How old are you as a technical person in the strategy of sales efforts?
So the question is, at what point do you know I need a salesperson and I'm going to hire that particular specialty or accounting or whatever? I mean, I can speak for me. When I started, I was the salesperson because I also wrote the code. So, and everyone always told me, well, count on as a solo consultant, you'll work about 1,000 hours a year, which, you guys, that's half time, right? And they said the other half you should be out there marketing and selling your services. And I thought, okay, that's pretty good. What I found is that, I don't know if I'm persuasive or what, but I would be out and talking to people and I would get people to sign up for projects and then I wouldn't be able to deliver because I didn't have enough hours in the day to get all the coding done that I needed. And also, sometimes customers would come and they'd ask me to code something, and I'm not particularly good at that particular type of coding. Like, let's say I was really good at client-server development, but then they want a website or whatever. So you can branch out with technology, and it might not be you. It might be someone else that you need to partner with or hire. In my case, we never got an actual sort of dedicated salesperson until just a few years ago. Up until then, I was really handling most of the inbound. We do advertising. We haven't really talked about that, marketing and advertising. But we do web advertising on the three major search engines, and so we have someone handling all those inbound stuff. But that's only from a couple of years ago. Before that, I was trying to do it myself, and it's tough. Accounting, I definitely split off a lot sooner than that. So we wouldn't want me to handle the accounting. So what about you guys? What types of things did you split off first, and when do you know when you need to do it?
Luke, go ahead.
We got an outside accountant immediately, just because that's a skill set that I didn't have, and all the compliance and paperwork is pretty important to take care of. The IRS is not very forgiving, and even after you set up a corporation, of course, you need legal stuff to get the corporation set up. But as a business owner, you're personally liable for taxes. So that pierces the corporate shield. So that's pretty important. In terms of sales, starting out, I was the salesperson.
Yep.
Over the years, we've had different approaches to generating business, which could be on, we've invested heavily on marketing more than we have on sales, but we've done sales as well. And the challenge that I have, and I think most business people have, is managing salespeople. Managing salespeople is a very, very different skill set versus managing technical people. Being technical myself, I can gauge whether somebody who's technical is making progress. In the whole business development area, it's very hard to have metrics, or very hard to tell when progress is being made, because you're talking about when a relationship gets to a certain point. You could do different types of pipelines. You can come up with different schemes of doing it and say, oh, well, we have a 50% chance on this project and an 80% chance on this. Well, the way the world works is it's really binomial. It's 0 or 100%.
Yeah.
You don't get 50% of the project. You don't get 80% of the project. You either get the whole project or you don't get any of it. So a lot of those pipeline predictions don't quite work. So we try to look at it from a couple perspectives in terms of sales, which is, how much are we getting from existing clients? How much are we getting from new clients that we've never met with? But it's hiring people that can do those things. But the bigger challenge on top of that is, how do you manage them once you bring them on board?
Yeah, I'm pretty much the same as him. It was pretty much me for the first, several years. Just in the last probably 5 or 6 years have we really had salespeople on board. I agree, you can't get 80%, so they don't mean anything. It's either you closed the deal or you didn't. I think one of the hardest things is trying to manage the salespeople, as Luke said, because they are a different animal. And here's the problem. Most salespeople, they can sell a product. Most people cannot sell a service.
Yeah.
And that's what we're selling. So that's the one thing that you could really need to focus on. If you're going to be bringing in a salesperson, make sure they've sold services before. Or are they really good at relationships? I mean, do you like them right away? When they walk in that door, are they so personable you really want to talk to them? That's probably a good person that you want to put out there with your clients. Okay? You can have salespeople that can talk on the phone, but you would never send them out to a client site, right? And they could sell a product, but they could not sell a service. So those, I think, are probably the attributes you really need to look for. I
have a buddy that says he uses the fishing test. Would you go out fishing with this guy or this gal? If you would go out and, I've used it, would you have them over for dinner? But I like the fishing test because you're trapped on a boat all day. Dinner, you can always leave.
Yeah. Or play golf with them,
or play golf or whatever. But, use that personality test because selling a product, I agree. I mean, we sell products too. All three of us have products that we have as part of our businesses as well. That's something we haven't really touched on too much, but that's also another way to try to smooth out the demand is to sell products. And So we're always trying to smooth that out, but the person who can sell a product is different.
Yeah.
And we happen to have a salesperson, I think, who's pretty good at doing both, but it's all about personality, and it's about having that, with us, mostly a phone voice, because we advertise all across the country, so most of our clients would never meet us unless the project moved forward, and even if it moves forward, we can do most of it remotely. So,
I actually took a guy who was not a salesman. He'd worked in a lot of industries that was customer facing, and I took him on, and this is after I'd hired like 5 other people in the last 7 years, and he turned out to be my best guy. He makes more sales for us, gets us in the door more often than any of the other professional salespeople ever did. So that's why that relationship thing is so important, I think.
Yeah. I think we're getting a little bit low on time. Any other questions before we wrap up? Yes, sir. Oh, we talked about this before the panel. We wondered if this was going to come up. So the question is, have we considered using offshoring? We have not in our shop. We actually did have an offshore developer that was, I'll say, imposed upon us by our client. It was sort of interesting. Our client, which was a Fortune 100 company that I won't name, had an agreement with an offshore firm and had a developer. In this case, it turned out to be a single solo developer, but they had basically rented him out for the next several months, and they was like, use it or lose it, use him or lose him, and so we had to, and actually that turned out okay. But we have actually had quite a few clients recently and in the past too call us and say, we want to hire your company, but we want to ensure that you're actually having all the development is local. And so anyway, we've seen it kind of back and forth. What are your guys' experiences with offshoring?
We've seen the same thing. I've had more and more companies now coming back after a very bad experience. In fact, I got called in as an expert witness 3 different times in the last 5 years of companies that were now suing the offshore development company because they didn't get what they wanted. And after I wrote up my 18-page report on how everything was done so poorly, they settled. So never actually went to court.
I'm a little up in the air on this. I mean, we're not using any offshore people for our services, and but that's a competitive threat. So, what are our competitive threats? Well, we have clients who could do the work themselves, right? They don't have to outsource it at all. They could offshore it. And we have to compete against, I think, those 2 major forces. How many opportunities we never saw because they went offshore, I have no idea. But I know that's significant because it is a big player there. And I also know that there are a lot of companies who have had terrible times with their offshore partners, but they've also had terrible times with their onshore partners.
Onshore, too.
Yeah.
So that's not always a differentiator. I think what's important for us is how do we differentiate ourselves versus the competition, versus whether people do it themselves, versus whether they take it offshore. And that's the critical piece that we want to be able to play, because we're not going to be able to play the role of lowest cost. Offshore will always be lower cost than anything that we do here.
Lowest cost per hour.
Lowest cost per hour,
or maybe not total cost, though. We always argue, well, the total cost, once the quality comes into play, once the speed of the development comes into play, someone could be a quarter of our rate but take 5 times as many hours. So you can't make it up in volume.
There's been a lot of articles lately about that too, that generally the cost now is typically within 20% of offshore versus onshore. There have been a lot of studies on that lately.
They're evening up. Yeah.
They are evening up because the offshore guys are now raising their rates, right? But the problem is that it usually takes them a lot longer to get it done with the time lags and the poor quality, and they make them redo things.
And communication is key in these types of projects. So you can have a product, if you're building a product, and it has a specification that's been completely nailed down. Okay, I sort of get that maybe a large offshore team could possibly create it and it would be great. But in services, communication day by day, hour by hour, pick up the phone, answer questions, those kinds of things, it comes down to just really critical communication, even a sense of humor, even the cultural assumptions, and relationships, and all those types of things. It really matters. It really matters. We even have cultural differences within the United States, right? We could talk to somebody in Texas or the East Coast or whatever, and we have to sort of get used to feel it out. Get used to talking to people. And I could see why it could be a big problem. I'm also like Luke. I'm not willing to completely rule it out because it has to. But if it could work right, I think it would be good. I just have not had the experience yet where it was a real solution. So, yeah. Any other questions before we wrap up? Yeah.
Where do you see your biggest differentiator? I know right now, cost is one thing, but customers now are more looking for, I'm doing this project because of the return I'm looking for. Because how fast can I get that return? Can you get that return? So their decisions are looking at more based on less on technology, less on cost and solution, more on the technology actually hitting my bottom line.
Yeah.
You guys seeing the same?
Yeah, good question. So the question is, especially in this economy, we're seeing customers looking at the total return on their investment rather than particular technologies. So how do you guys handling that as far as differentiating ourselves?
I mean, that's something that we've always emphasized on. I mean, there's nothing that's better for your business than to give your client the opportunity to give you $1 and they make $1 and a penny, right? They can do that forever, right? That's what we want to be able to do. And so it's a matter of return on investment. How can we show value to the customer? How can we reduce the client's risk so that when they give us money, when they make an investment in us, that they trust that what's going to come back to them is what they actually want, is actually better than what they thought they would be able to do on their own, or if they took it offshore, or took it to one of hundreds of other consulting firms that are in the area. So that's the kind of differentiator that we want to have. It's involving a return on investment. It's having references, other clients that they could talk to say, hey, these guys really understood my business. They understood the challenges that we were facing and created something that we really couldn't have done on our own.
Yeah, it comes to getting a track record and having those references and being able to present that, yes, we do understand. We're not just geeks who are going to come in and geek out and do this agile back and forth. Okay, customers don't understand agile.
Or tell you how to run your business.
Right.
A lot of consultants say, oh, I know, wait a minute, here, I got the solution for you, and I can tell you how to run your business, and that just doesn't work. It's got to be a partnership.
It's that partnership, it's that relationship management. I think it all goes back to that. And that's why we like to do those small little mini discoveries up front, because then we see if we can really work with them, plus it gives them us a chance to prove that we really understand what they're talking about. And we can come up with some ideas right away that say, you know, if we did this, I'll bet you we could get that return for you.
Right.
You know, and hopefully you garner that trust within that first, 24 or 40 hours.
Right. I mean, the critical piece here is to be able to allow people to make small investments in their business opportunities. I see. So instead of creating a multi-month or a multi-year project so that, it's going to be 12 months before the application is deployed, can we come up with something that isn't what that would be, a fraction of what that would be in 1 month or a couple of months? Because, a 30% solution in 3 months may be much more valuable than a 100% solution in a year, especially in this economy where companies are disappearing overnight, or within that time frame, or regulations change, or business opportunities change, totally outside the technical specifications of an application. It's much more important to be able to create low-cost opportunities. If you're going to create something that fail quickly, and move on to the next opportunity.
And actually deliver it, because so many software projects fail.
Yeah.
I mean, you read about the big ones in the newspaper. When you open up the newspaper and it says there's some state agency or whatever that tried to deploy something and they spent $100 million on it, and then it was just, they pulled the plug. Well, you know what? That happens all the time with small projects. You just don't read about them in the paper. So what we try to bring to the table is look at our list of references, look at our track record, look at our templates, look at our code base, and we say we're sure that we'll deliver the project. I mean, it will get done. And that assurance can mean an awful lot. Sorry? We have had projects that have not been delivered, but it's because the customer's business changed. But if there's a project that we said we're going to deliver and the customer stayed with it and the business requirements stayed consistent throughout and they didn't want to pull the plug because their business shifted, then we've delivered them, every single one.
I mean, ultimately, when you're in a service business, you're selling trust. Right? You're selling a result, but you're also selling trust. And the person that hires you, and I'm cognizant of this every time we do a contract or transaction, they are risking part of their career when they select FMS as their vendor. They're putting their reputation on the line. And that's something that we try to recognize and understand. That could keep that person awake at night. Gosh, I chose the wrong vendor. You know, they're screwing up my project. I'm not going to get a raise. I could get fired. I'm not going to get promoted. Those are real issues that our clients are concerned about and that we want to try to make sure aren't negatives, right? We want to make them so successful that they do get promoted. Make them look great. And that is our mission. That is our goal there. That's why we're being hired. We're being hired to make certain problems go away, right? I'm sure this person has lots of other problems on their plate. We can make one piece of it go away, then we've done our job.
And that's why you need those quick wins. You need to do something very quick to show them, wow, this guy delivered when he said he was going to deliver. And then they can say, oh, wait a minute, that was 30% of what we wanted to do, but my God, we got a 50% return. So what's the total project going to be like? Wow.
Right.
You've got to deliver that, and you got to deliver it quick.
Well, speaking of delivering, we have to deliver this panel because it's at its conclusion. But thank you very much for your attention, guys, and I really appreciate it. We'll see you around.
All right, thank you.
Bye-bye.